Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Runetalker. I'm Maitland, joined as always by Simon,
Hey everyone.
and we're back for another week. So the newest expansion has dropped, and yeah, one of the I guess, quirks of the way that Runeterra does expansions, I can just never remember the name of the expansions because of how they lay them out. But it's out, and there are three new champions. And we've had a few days to play with them and see what effect they have on the meta, and it's been pretty fun. So today we're going to go over a few. I've got three decks that I'd like to highlight and chat about, and we'll just have a general chat about how we feel about the new cards and how they've affected the meta, and how have you found the new patch to be, Simon? Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, it's honestly been a lot of fun. So one of the champions has been super impactful. One of them has made essentially no impact, and one of them has been like kind of fun, showing up in a few decks, but hasn't really been that dominant. Which
Yeah,
isn't the worst spread.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
how
with
have you been
only
finding
three
it?
champions, I do feel like maybe you'd want them to be a bit more impactful than they have been. I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by the fact that Irelia is the one that is absolutely dominating the meta. Malphite has been not really seen at all, and Zillion. I think you're being a bit generous to Zillion. I think Zillion's just, and maybe it's because Zillion is a more complex champ, and it's going to take a while for people to find where it belongs, or when the meta settles down a bit, it'll have a home. But at the moment, I think it's vastly unplayable at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think he's that great, but yeah, at the same time, we did only have three champions released, but I am kind of glad that they didn't push them all so hard that they like dominate the meta and every new champ release is like that. I think it's kind of good that some sort of fall in the middle or fall by the wayside a bit. But yeah, Zillion, I mean, I could see some cool Zillion decks showing up eventually, but yeah, at the moment he's kind of medium. Like we mentioned on, I think it was last week's episode, his hero spell, his champion spell is like really bad. Like it's even worse than we first thought as well. So giving an
Yeah.
allied champion, the ability to come back to life with +3/+3 when it dies, like did not realize that effect could be hushed off when it's put on a unit, but
Oh
it just
god.
like makes it even worse. Yeah. So I don't know. Zillion's been like interesting, and it's kind of crazy because a lot of the time you're like using Zillion to put time bombs in your deck, and then you're like actively hoping your first Zillion dies so you can play another one, get some more time bombs in your deck. But yeah, you're right. He hasn't been the most impactful champion.
Yeah, we were looking at stats today, which is the first time I've really had a look at the data. But I get a lot of sort of feelings about the meta from obviously playing games and also from Twitter. And one of the things that I'm always wary of is seeing a big difference between what people are hitting masters with and doing well with, and what the streamers are posting. And Zillion for me is one I'm seeing a lot of streamers playing it, streamers posting lists for, and I'm not seeing a lot of people hitting masters with it. And so, yeah, I feel like Zillion's a cool, fun one, and you can do interesting things with. But I don't think, and it might be that it's a really high skill cap card, or it takes a while for the shell to evolve. But at the moment, it just feels like a trap, a
Yeah, no,
streamer
I'd
trap.
agree with that. And honestly, I feel like the tests with Zillion and the high skill cap elements probably come from like deck building, because in game when you're playing Zillion, it like you're not really making that many decisions once the Zillion's in play. Like you might have to choose what you do with your predict, but that's not always the most complex decision. So yeah, I definitely think that if Zillion, does come through and shine, it's probably going to be because, people figure out a good shell to put around him more so than something like Aphelios, where on release, I think it did take a little while for people to really figure out those play patterns with the weapons, and that gave him a really big power level jump.
Yeah, and I sort of said this in our last episode. I think that I know there's a card that like gets bigger when you predict or something, and that's quite that that rewards you for predicting. And then this set they've released a lot more predict cards, and maybe in the next expansion there'll be some more payoffs for predicting, and maybe that's when Zillion will really perk up. But at the moment, yeah, predicting as a mechanic, like it's obviously a powerful mechanic, but just because of how easy it is to draw cards, I don't think it's as powerful as it could be in some other card games. And so for me, it feels like it really needs some more sort of payoff reasons that we might see in future expansions for it to really pop off.
Yeah, great.
All right, so let's talk a bit more about Irelia, because that's really the most dominant deck in the meta at the moment. It's just got really good win rates at all levels and is seeing really high play percentages at all levels. And so it's what I've been playing as well today. And it is just really fun, right? Like, I'm interested to see what you think, because people always complain, I think, sometimes about if champions match the feel of the champion from League. And I feel like Irelia really does. You know, I probably haven't played as much Irelia as you, but I feel like, especially when you're blade surging, when you're swapping Irelia with another unit, I really feel like I'm playing Irelia and I'm getting to do those fun Irelia things. How do you think Irelia stacks up against the League version?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm pretty sure they reworked Irelia in League, and I haven't played her since the rework. So I'm not sure how much she's sort of changed. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe this build feels more like, you know, the proper Irelia. Are you googling the rework? I can hear.
Yeah, no, just keep talking.
yeah. Okay. We'll save this segment. Yeah. Yeah. No, she feels really cool. Like, she honestly feels super fun. Like, I've really enjoyed playing with her, and, you know, playing against her, sometimes some like frustrating things can happen, but I feel like there's enough sort of like counterplay, and you can build your deck enough to beat what she's doing, and a lot of decks in the meta have been doing that I feel like playing against it isn't as frustrating as playing against some of these other sort of overtuned decks, or it even feels less frustrating than playing against Azir Lucian, which is like trying to do a similar thing but doing it worse. Like, I feel like it's actually more fun to play against this Irelia deck. And yeah, you're right, some of it does feel like pretty thematic. Like, it's really cool being able to Blade Surge and like swap Irelia around, and it feels like you can discover a lot of really interesting plays or things to do with Irelia to like get an edge, and I think that's like a really, really cool thing to have built into the champion. And yeah, the fact that there is that counterplay available means that it's not like as frustrating to lose against as like losing to the Watcher combo or something like that, for instance.
Yeah, I was telling you today that I had a fun situation where I had an Azir, a flipped Azir, a flipped Irelia, and a Deus out with a few other units. I had a full board, and I had a Blade Surge attack, or Blade Dance, attack happening with a few units. And after my opponent blocked, one of my units was unblocked, and one of the sand soldiers, so I Blade Surged my Irelia in to get in some extra damage, and then realized that now that because the Sand Soldier goes to my board, and now there's no space for Irelia to go back, and so my Irelia died, which was a bit rough, except it actually ended up looking like I intended to do it, because I had a second Irelia in hand, so then I could play the second Irelia and use the spell that Irelia makes to do another attack and get in another hit with Irelia, and it just heaps of damage. Yeah, so you can with
that
all
is
of
so
the,
good.
It was.
I love that play. That's amazing. Yeah.
And like when my first Irelia died, my opponent was emoting me and getting all BM, and I was like in bed just like, oh my god, what have I done? And so sometimes when I'm playing, like my wife and I will just be in bed and I'll be playing games, and I'll be like, oh dear. And my wife will be like, what's wrong? And I'm like, oh no, I'm just playing games, And this is one of those situations. And then and ended up getting in a heap more damage and winning very easily. So yeah, there is. And we've always seen that with Stand United, that being able to swap units is just a really interesting and powerful ability, and Irelia lets you do that. The fact that you get the swap spell on Blade Dance attacks isn't something I really realized on first seeing the card, and that's an incredibly powerful interaction to just really stack up all the swaps.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, the fact that you don't have to play the swap, it doesn't go away at the end of the combat, it goes away at the end of the turn. So you can, do your Blade Dance attack, get a surge, then do your regular attack, get another surge, and then because, the surge swaps an ally with Irelia, but once you have 2 copies of the surge, you can swap any 2 allies, because Irelia swaps with one of them and then swaps with the other, and they've like swap places. Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's like a really cool synergy that honestly I didn't even see come up in like my first 10 games with the deck, and then it's just like opens up some really interesting and cool lines. So yeah, keep that in mind if
Yeah.
that comes up in a game for you.
Yeah, and Dancing Droplet just lets you do so many things as well. Plus, especially with Lead and Follow, those two cards together give you a heap of opportunities to generate extra mana and cards and attacks and damage. And this deck is just really sweet, to be honest. I'm enjoying playing it so much. You get so many options. We've been talking about how interesting phasing your attacks is, because if you're sort of gold fishing, then you really want to play out all your units to get all your Sparring Student and Azir stacks up, and then attack, and then do your Blade Dancers first to keep stacking them up, and then do your final big attack. But in a lot of situations, that's not correct, because your opponent might play good blockers, and so you want to get your first attack in first, and then do your Blade Dancers afterwards. And also, when you want to Blade Dance on your opponent's turn is a really interesting thing as well. And yeah, I've just been really enjoying playing this deck and the interesting decisions that it provides. Plus, it's like maybe busted. It's very strong. It's doing really, really well at all elos. I think the meta is starting to adjust, and it's definitely too early to call for nerfs, but it is feeling very strong.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there are decks that can attack it very effectively as well. So there are a lot of decks that have very good win rates against it, and then there are like individual cards that are also very good against the strategy that you can sort of slot into some existing decks, which I think is like a good way to keep it in check without necessarily needing nerfs. So I think Ice Shard has been showing up in a lot of Freljord decks. So Overwhelm lists have just been playing 3 copies of Ice Shard, for instance. Scargrounds has had a bit of a resurgence, and then we've also seen Radiant Guardian making it into a lot of lists as well. Some mono Fiora decks I've noticed on the ladder as well have a pretty positive win rate against this deck, obviously because you could basically win the game with Fiora in a single turn sometimes if they really start going off. So yeah, a lot's really been happening at the moment with the meta, and this deck is definitely highest play rate, and it's got a really good win rate as well.
Yeah, I think this deck is really... I think the way you should be looking at the meta at the moment is this deck's really what everything centers around. If you're not playing this deck, then I think you should be playing a deck that is really good against it. I feel like just with how much it's being played and with how good it is and with how sort of centralizing it is on the meta, I don't know how much I like trying to sort of beat up on the decks that beats up on Irelia. Plus, they're quite varied. So I really feel like I want to be playing Azir Irelia or a deck that is really good against Azir Irelia.
Yeah, definitely. So of the decks that are really good against Azir Irelia, a lot of aggro decks have a really favorable matchup. So discard aggro, Spider Burn, I think most burn lists tend to have a positive matchup just because Irelia Azir, while it's a reasonably aggressive deck, it does take a little while to set up, and it's not particularly good at blocking your opponent favorably as well, so it can be outraced, which is an issue. It also struggles against one of the other big players and a holdover from the last season, which is Nasus Thresh. It's really easy for them to flip Thresh. They have a lot of good blockers. It's really easy for them to get a bunch of slay triggers when you're forced to attack every turn. So that matchup isn't particularly good, particularly if they're running things like Withering Wail to be able to gain some extra life and really just decimate a key attack. So there are definitely some ways to attack the Irelia lists which don't necessarily make you particularly vulnerable in other matchups as well.
Yeah, Azir Darius Burn is another burn deck that has been doing really well against the Irelia decks, and just being able to get in all that early aggression and go under, because like you said, the deck does take just a couple of extra turns on the Goldfish from Burn to be able to take over the game, and so they're a really good call. I think the 2 decks at the moment that I would recommend the most for ladder play are Azir Irelia and then Nasus Thresh, just because it was one of, if not the best deck last season, and it got a few cool new toys to play with, and it beats up on all those aggro decks we just talked about, and it's also good against the Irelia Azir. Oh god.
Yeah.
deck. And so yeah, so some of the new cards that it got. Oh, also we should probably talk about the nerfs because I was going to say this before. I really like, this is what I think was the biggest miss they had last new set release was that they didn't do any nerfs, and that it's not like always there needs to be nerfs, but if there needs to be nerfs, then I think you should do it at or before set release as opposed to releasing the cards and then seeing what happens. I mean, there's some situations where releasing the new cards means that you don't need the nerfs, but also a lot of times the writing is on the wall. And I think it was with Thresh Nasus, and so it got hit with Blighted Caretaker losing 1 point of power and Atrocity going to 7 mana, neither of which are really backbreaking nerfs, and people are still playing multiple copies of both of those cards in a lot of their lists, and so, but it has definitely toned down the power of the deck. Has it been enough, especially since the deck got some new toys with the Wings and the Wave, which is a really versatile sort of early game pressure sack outlet. It does a lot of things that the deck wants to do in a reasonable fashion. And then Merciless Hunter is just one of the most powerful cards in the new set. The 3 mana 4/3 fearsome, give an enemy vulnerable, is just incredibly powerful, really good, especially in this deck for getting in chip damage, for getting rid of key units, for getting slay stacks. It just does everything that you could want on a very good body.
Yeah, it's just such a good card, and it really has buffed up a lot of different Shurima decks as well. So pretty much, if you're playing a Shurima deck, you should probably consider running Merciless Hunter. That being said, it's not in Irelia or Azir at the moment because the deck, it doesn't really contribute to any of the key synergies, and you already have 2 players that you're basically hard mulling to try to play on turn 3. So definitely take some of the power out of Merciless Hunter, but yeah, definitely a very strong option and something you should be mindful of when you're playing against Shurima decks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of already had to be mindful of turn 3 was a very important turn for that deck because of Blighted Caretaker, and now there's a different turn 3 thread that you've got to play around a sort of different way as well, and so the deck just got a big increase in how much it can control the board on that third turn, which is, as you said, a very critical turn, especially against the Irelia Azir deck and a lot of other decks as well. So still a really powerful deck. As you sort of mentioned at the start, there have been people who have been subbing in Zillion over Thresh. Those decks don't look as impressive to me, and their win rates are also just not as impressive as well. So I definitely stick with just the tried and true Thresh Nasus version for now.
Yeah, definitely. Those Zillion builds are definitely leaning into running a lot more removal as well. So there are far fewer creatures in the deck. And you're really just banking on getting your slay triggers by killing your opponent's units, which obviously isn't going to work if your opponent doesn't really have that many units. So if you end up playing against something like Trundle Lysandra Control, your matchup is just going to be absolutely horrendous. And the more you lean into that, removal to be able to clear out your opponent's 1 toughness or small units, the better you make yourself against aggro. The worse you're going to be against just these random mid-range decks that sort of can go over the top of that. Particularly the ones that, don't have small units for you to kill. Because honestly, I did play around with that deck a little bit this week, and there were so many games where I was just playing a 3/3 Nasus and just hoping that my hand was 3 copies of Nasus, a box, and 2 go hards, and my opponent hadn't played any units. So I'm okay, great, let's play this Nasus, and maybe maybe the second one will live. But there are some real weaknesses to that strategy. But it can be you can definitely get paid off if you queue into something that really needs its 1 toughness units to survive.
Yeah, and so then I guess the natural thing for us to talk about next is the third release champion, the Mountain in the Room, Malphite, one of my favorites from League of Legends, the one that when I've since Runeterra was out, the champion I've most looked forward to playing has been rock solid Malphite, and it's pretty unfortunate, and I'm interested to hear what your sort of thoughts are on why Malphite has failed to be an unstoppable force on the Runeterra field.
Yeah. So there are a lot of issues with Malphite at the moment. Firstly, not a huge fan of the art on the level 1 card. Could be improved. probably
Yeah?
wouldn't affect competitive play. Yeah, I'm not loving it. The leveled up art looks kind of cool, but yeah, I'm just not loving the level 1 art. But honestly, yeah, there are a few issues with Malphite. So for a start, 7 mana for a 6/10 tough is just not a great body. So it's a lot of
It's just a
stats. It's like
nothing body,
8/8 worth of stats, but it's just, yeah, it just doesn't do anything. Like, it just gets chump blocked forever, or your opponent has like bigger units, or it's just like not really doing that much. Like, and the fact that it's in Targon as well, like, it just doesn't really, like, it's just competing with a lot of like big late game stuff. Like, you've got like Eclipse Dragon for 7 mana. If you want these big late game cards, like, are you really running Malphite over something like Asol? Like, you need like a specific synergy or something like that. The next thing is like the level up is just so hard. So you have to summon 12 plus mana of landmarks. And then, yeah, when he levels up at the round start or when summoned, you make an unstoppable force, which like is 2 mana, stun all enemies, but it's like a slow spell. And at that point, you've got a 7/11 Malphite, which again, like, is just not that relevant of a body. You also end up in these spots where, like, how are you getting 12 mana worth of landmarks? Like, that is really, really difficult. And if you are at a point where you do have 12 mana of landmarks, like, there's a good chance that you've spent some board space on that, so you might not have enough units to be able to take advantage of the unstoppable force of stunning your opponent's board and killing them. I've seen some people are playing, there's the 5-drop landmark that stuns 2 enemies on countdown, the 2 weakest enemies, and then it makes a copy of itself, so that gives you like 10 mana worth of landmarks. I think that's the synergy to sort of like jumpstart you towards Malphite, but that just doesn't, like, that's just not that powerful. You're you're just running these cards that aren't really doing anything. They're stalling, but they're not really stalling for anything. And then once you have a Malphite in play, like, sure, it would be really cool to be able to stun the whole board and then just, kill your opponent. But even after you play this card, because it's a slow speed card, they get to play more blockers potentially. They get to, sweep your board away. It's not like the Ash unblockable effect where you play your Ash, you play your, 2 Frostbite spells, your Harsh Winds, your Flash Freeze. They're both burst spells. You attack again, and then, 4 of their units can't block. You actually give them a chance to do something again, and it's kind of telegraphed. I don't know. It's just all these pieces just mean that you've got this payoff that even when it works perfectly, even when you have a flipped Malphite on turn 7, you can only use this ability offensively. So I don't know. It just seems kind of awkward to me. Has that been your takeaway as well, Maitland?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to have a quick pet peeve about when they do the spoilers for new cards and they do the spoiler images. Don't put skills on. I don't need to see the skills. Like, the card already says what it does. I don't need to, like, I just want to see what the new cards are. But that's just a quick aside. But yeah, essentially the Malphite big body, like, it could be 100, and I don't think it would be even that much better. Like, it's just,
Oh, I'd play that.
yeah, I mean, it just gets, well, because you could atrocity then, I guess, but like, it just gets chumped, right? And that's because I've actually played against Malphite once this expansion, so I've got some actual first-hand experience. And yeah, everything you said was definitely a problem. Like, Malphite, I was like, it doesn't matter, I can just chump that with a 1/1, I don't care. Whereas the smaller creatures they have with trample were much bigger issues. And so, yeah, the body doesn't matter. The fact that it's tough, I mean, it's got 10 toughness. Like, who cares? And then the unstoppable force, yeah, it's slow. And then, yeah, you just play out more units. And because Malphite, doesn't have trample, you can just block it with straight up anything. So it doesn't matter. And I think the biggest problem is, and I said this to you, I think a little while ago, or maybe I said in our Discord, that my concern with Malphite was that it was balanced around how Temple used to work before Temple got a big nerf. And now that Temple got a big nerf, there's not as many good landmarks. Like, the level up, the champions that are strongest are often because their level up is just something that you want to do. You know, you want to be playing units, you want to be attacking. They're things that you want to do, you can do easily, and getting a payoff for that is really strong. You don't want to be summoning 12 plus mana worth of landmarks. No deck wants to be doing that because there's just no landmarks that, no deck that is not desperately trying to fill their deck with landmarks to fill that is ever going to meet this clause. And so that's already a big hurdle. It means you're putting cards into your deck that other good decks aren't running. And so your payoff has to be really good, and the payoff is just not really that good at the moment. And I also think that there's an unfortunate thing, and maybe this sort of doesn't matter or gets worked out in the wash, but Malphite seems to have synergy with a lot of cards because its ultimate stuns things. And so I've seen people pairing it with like Yasuo and Leona, because Leona stuns things, but that doesn't really matter. Like, Yasuo doesn't really play landmarks, so it doesn't help level up Malphite. And then when you Unstoppable Force, like, I don't think having a flipped Yasuo out as well to attack, like, you either kill them on that attack or you don't. Like, it's just silly synergy, I think. So I think.
I mean, yeah. I guess if the best bet for the landmark that you want to use is the stun their 2 weakest units. So you've got a 5 mana card that stuns 4 things to flip Yasuo. Like, I can kind of see that pairing. Like, I'm just not sure what else I would want to pair Malphite with, honestly.
Yeah, and you also, like, the problem is that the good landmarks, things like Temple, want to be in play and stay in play. But if you need to summon 12 mana of landmarks, you need them to be going away. You need them getting out of the way. And the landmarks just aren't good at the moment. And so it's a bit of a shame. Pretty sad about Malphite. I don't even really know what can be done about him at the moment. Like, without sort of changing the core of the character, my thoughts on how Malphite could be better is he could cost less mana and his level up condition could be considerably less. But are pretty big buffs. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like Malphite's pretty far away from... I feel like he's so far away that I don't even know if with buffs he'll ever be competitive, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because like you were saying earlier, how they kind of base the champion design on how they are in League of Legends. Like, Malphite's kind of a victim of that. It's like you've got this big, tough body, heaps of toughness, not that good on attacks. And then the ultimate is, the ultimate in League of Legends where you stun all these units. It's like this offensive thing. Like, you can only use it on attacks as part of the card. It's like this weird, like, mismatch of, like, having this tanky unit where I want to slow the game down, but then, I'm going to attack you and I'm going to stun all your stuff. Like, what are you going to do? And I feel like that kind of is a detriment to the card at the moment because, like, just all of those pieces just aren't really working together that well, particularly on a 7-drop, champion.
Yeah, no, I do think it does match the league pretty well. You do your Unstoppable Forces Malphite, and then that's your contribution to the team fight, and then you just sort of watch and hope that your team win the fight, which is what Malphite does. He needs a lot else happening for you to win after casting Unstoppable Force. All right, I think we've talked enough about Malphite for being just straight unplayable. The third deck that I do think was interesting in those first 2 decks, the Irelia and the Nasus are definitely what I would suggest to play on the ladder. But this third one is one that I think we're going to be looking into a bit more and trying to figure out, because I think it's a bit interesting the way its stats are and how it's positioned at the moment. And that is Shyvana, Irelia, and Sol. And so we've obviously seen Irelia and Sol, and particularly Irelia and Sol Zoe. And I feel like people keep playing at like the start of expansions Irelia and Sol Garen. And then that's like really popular for ages. And then the seasonal comes around and everyone's like, obviously we're playing Irelia and Sol Zoe. And there's no Garen anywhere. But I just don't know why people keep going back to Garen, because it just doesn't do anything. But anyway, we're not looking at Garen at the moment. We're looking at Shyvana, because Shyvana got some buffs. Got a buff a little while ago to get Fury, which hasn't really moved the delta. But now that Blade Dance is a thing and people are throwing 1/1s into combat every turn, Fury's gotten a lot better. And so I think that's a pretty interesting place for Shyvana at the moment. And so I really want to see this deck a bit more. And you were saying that I think you played against it or with it. And yeah, the Blade Dance it lets you flip Shyvana much faster. If Shyvana gets bigger, or you've got a number of Fury units, so they're all getting bigger, and you've also got, or you can, you've got a number of lifesteal units with Sunforger, the Fangs, potentially. What's the tough one that is good?
Radiant Guardian.
Radiant Guardian, Screeching Dragon. You've got a lot of units that can really punish the Irelia deck. So you've got a lot of really good tools there, and then you've obviously got the late game of Eclipse Dragon, Aurelian Soul. So yeah, this one I haven't played or seen much, but I think that it's gotten a number of buffs along a long period of time, and it's always been sort of okay. And I feel like it could be. It's always been good for seasonals. We talked about that last time about how this deck has so many different builds and you can tailor it to be good as part of a seasonal list. But I think it might have gotten to the stage where it's good on ladder as well.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like you were saying, it's just really easy to flip Shyvana on their multiple attacks each turn. Shyvana doesn't lose any health. She just gains attack when she blocks these units. So yeah. It's a net positive there. And then once Shyvana transforms and you get to threaten a strafing strike on their champions, sure, they've got ways to protect their champions, but if they're spending their mana doing that, it's usually pretty good for you. And eventually you're going to overwhelm that and just be able to clear out their Azir, clear out their Inspiring Marshal, or potentially their Irelia. And that's just going to let you pull ahead pretty quickly. And also, just having a clock is really good as well, because the late game plays that the Irelia deck can set up are pretty ridiculous, but if you have a clock and a way to get you there, I think that's why Radiant Guardian's so good. It's they get all these attacks where they're getting in little bits of chip damage, and it should be getting you down and then grinding you out. But once you've got a Radiant Guardian in play, you just get to completely nullify one of those units, and then the +4 life means you're generally nullifying multiple of their hits per attack. So I think that's a really strong tech card, which also lets you be sort of proactive, gives you the ability to use single combat and concerted strike to also gain some additional life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Judgment's pretty good against that deck as well. And yeah, you've just got a lot of ways to deal with their backline units with single combat, concerted strike, Dragon, Guard Lieutenant, Screeching Dragon. You've got a lot of ways to disrupt, and that, like you said, you apply that pressure. You sort of get slightly ahead of them and put them on the back foot, and then you keep applying the pressure, which is just really important in beating that deck. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, an interesting one. Yeah, apart from that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that from the last expansion that's been doing well, but yeah, I think that's sort of the areas that I think are really safe to be playing in on the ladder at the moment. What do you think about Watcher Control? Where's that sitting?
So it's an interesting one at the moment. So it's got a positive matchup against a lot of these hyper aggressive decks that are trying to beat up on the Irelia Azir deck. But if you end up playing Irelia Azir against the you asked about Trundle Lysandra Control, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so Trundle Lysandra Control. So yeah, at the moment, so I think it does beat up on a lot of the hyper-aggressive decks. It just absolutely crushes discard aggro. But, and it's also beating up on the Spider Burn, those 1 toughness decks. It's just got so much life gain. It's got so many ways to generally beat aggressive decks. But when you're looking at something that runs Azir and Emperor's Dace, that just shifts so much. It ends up being so hard for those decks to just actually grind out the Sand Soldier tokens, which just can keep coming back. Azir is hyper resilient against a lot of the removal that those lists are running, because they're running 1 damage or 2 damage sweepers, so they need to, either spend 7 mana on a Vengeance to kill Azir and you get wildly far ahead on board, or use 3 sweepers to clear the Azir. So those issues and some of the play that you can come up with, for instance, if you're running, Notify or Deny on a key turn, you're using Lead Follow to bounce some of your units, you can really, really just crush that Lysandra deck. So I think that's been really pushing the Lysandra deck down at the moment, because that's just such a horrendous matchup that there's not enough aggro trying to prey on the Azir Aurelia deck to make up for that and make it worth running. So I honestly think that Trundle Lysandra Control at the moment isn't really in a great spot. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel the same. I think it's sort of it does beat up, like you said, like on those aggro decks that people might be using to go under Irelia Azir, but then, and you also beat Nasus Thresh, but the fact that you just get monstered, absolutely, like we're talking like 20-30% against Azir Irelia, is just, yeah, I would have to be in this pocket of the meta where I'm just seeing like no Azir Irelia and then heaps of the good matchups to want to do it, but just in general, I just think that if I'm not sure why you would play that over Nasus Thresh, which just has a very similar matchup spread, but also beats Azir Irelia and has some other key. Yeah, there are some differences between the matchups, but I think by and large, that's just sort of doing the same thing, but in a more effective way.
Yeah, definitely. And Trundle Lysandra Control, seems to have, a favourable matchup against the Nasus Thresh deck at the moment. So, I mean, if we do start seeing heaps of Nasus Thresh and, more aggro decks trying to beat up on Irelia or Azir, we could see Trundle Lysandra Control becoming a reasonable option again. But I think for the time being, or for at least the next couple of days, I would be definitely avoiding that deck.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Draven Ezreal around as well, so maybe that's a factor, but there is just so much Irelia Azir around, and so, yeah, unless you're in a weird spot on the ladder, I can't see wanting to do that, but, yeah, I mean, if you love making the watch, then go wild. Have you seen the variants of the deck where people are putting the new Cythria into play?
Oh, I've heard about this, but I haven't seen how it works. What does it do?
I have absolutely no idea. Okay. I can't even. I can't remember what the new Cythria does. The 10-drop.
So she's a 10-drop, and when she comes into play, when she's summoned, so you don't have to play her, she doubles the power and health of all your allies and gives them challenger, and then she's a 10/10 challenger herself. So she just makes your board massive, kind of like whatever that ship is that gets you a Sejuani. I think it's the Tusk Raider, that when you plunder, it doubles the power and health of all your units in your deck, but this does it for the ones that are in play instead.
Yeah, so essentially it's people are just putting that in with Matron, which is, like you said, it works on summon. And I mean, it's a really powerful thing. I haven't seen it yet, but it does feel like, I mean, it's very powerful, so I wouldn't be surprised if that deck sort of kept getting iterated on and ended up being a player. But at the moment, it's just an interesting one to note, I think. Actually, looking at the spoiler again now, I'm reminded of one of the cards that I thought was really interesting that I haven't seen come up at all yet, which is Incisive Tactician, which is the 8 mana 4/5 reputation. It costs 6 when it's summoned Rally.
Yeah. I feel like that's not going to make it. I don't know. I feel like there are just too many similar. Like, they're just... I feel like there are a bunch of cards that are like expensive, like you can rally strapped on a unit, and they're just always worse than running like the 3 mana rally spells a lot of the time.
But you don't have the option to run the 3 mana rally.
Oh, because it's Noxus?
Yeah. Like if you're running LeBlanc Severe, you can't run rally, and so...
Oh, I mean, you can run the 5 mana rally spell. Deal 2 to something rally, but I get your point. But
true.
I don't know. I feel like those sorts of decks, it's always like a lot of the strength in rally is against control. Like, it's horrendous against aggro, and you just want to be able to wait for them to tap out and then just rally and get like a really big attack, or do that like in the early to mid game when they're still setting up, so you can get like a really big advantage. But because I feel like there's really big units that rally, because I think there are 2 or 3 of them now. There's like the Citrus Courier in Bilgewater. Which obviously you need to get a hit in for first, so it's not super flexible. Then there's the 8 mana 8/8 in Demacia, which has just generally been like really horrible. Like, there are just better options, or a lot of the time the decks that it was going into, you would just rather run one of the rally spells or have your mana up when you're actually attacking. But it's interesting. Like, there could be a way to make it good, but I don't know. I still haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I do think it's underplayed at the moment. I think it's very comparable, like you said, to Citrus Courier. And Citrus Courier is a card that has shown up consistently a small amount each patch. And I haven't seen Incisive Tactician yet. And I think that yeah, I think it will get played a small amount, but yeah, a lot of what you said does ring true. These effects, like being able to rally for 3 mana is just so good. And another one that is I think a bit of a streamer trap at the moment is the sump worker. I don't know if you've sump worked or seen anyone else clocking in to do some sump work.
I saw one person play it against me, and it did look better than I expected, but it was still like not really that impressive.
Yeah,
It's definitely just a card that like you have to spend 4 mana to make it, like 4 mana and 2 cards to make it, like minimum, and that's like assuming that you just like draw 2 or you play like the ephemeral card to make a second copy or something like that. A lot of the time, if you're using like iterative improvement or something like that, it's going to be costing you 6 mana, and once you start thinking of it in terms of like a 6 mana card that costs you 2 other cards, it's like a lot less impressive.
yeah, and get stopped if your opponent can deal with a 1/2.
That can definitely can slow you down, because they always have that one interaction window when the first 1/2 comes down where you can kill that while it's on the board. So I haven't been super impressed with it, but I don't know, it has been picking up a little bit of steam, and seeing it in game, it was a bit more impressive than I thought it would be, because at first I was really, really negative on the card, but now I think, it's probably worth playing around with, seeing what you can do, but I'm not super impressed with it. Is that similar to how you feel, Maitland?
Yeah, similar to Zillion, where I'm not going to say that it's totally unplayable and it will always suck. I do think that all the shells it's played in at the moment suck, but it's a complicated card. There's a lot of moving pieces, but it's just so easy to deal. I don't think it'll ever need nerfs, because even if it is really good, like it it makes it a 4/2, and so like people can kill 4/2s, and so I think it could be better than it currently is. I think the shell could evolve, but at the moment, it just feels like a bit of a meme that streamers are trying to push on me.
Yeah. I saw it out of a like a Teemo burn deck, so it was like PNZ Shadow Isles, which was interesting. And they just like I could see it being strong in a sort of a deck like that, rather than an all-in combo deck where you have all of these cheap units which have to be answered basically as soon as they come down, and then you start making these elusive units when you've taxed their removal. Like I could see something like that maybe having some room to improve, but if you're running 3 copies of iterative improvement, 3 copies of make an ephemeral copy of a unit for 0 mana in your aggro deck, you're really going to hurt your consistency in the early game, and then you're just like not necessarily going to be good against anything. So it's an interesting idea, but yeah, definitely might be underpowered.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of games where you don't draw your 1/2 drop, and so then you've just got all these cards that are based around you drawing it, and you don't, and so you don't really do anything. And I think in Teemo decks, like I don't know, I just think every card in your deck should just on its own be good and be dealing damage to your opponent. And I think you're trying to introduce combos just gets you further from the optimum build of that deck.
Yeah, I'm generally inclined to agree. Like I prefer to build my decks in that way as well, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the Brewers come up with. If they put something together which is really sweet, I'll give it a go.
Absolutely, keep brewing, brew on. Were there any other decks that you thought were interesting or worth or good or worth talking about at the moment?
We spoke briefly about the Azir burn deck, so that's an interesting one that popped up a little bit on the Azir release, and obviously the headline upgrade for this deck is like Merciless Hunter is like super good in this deck. It lets you just like clear a key unit if you have to. Otherwise, you've got a 4/3 fearsome unit for 3 to like chip in some extra damage, and you can usually like clear the way. Like if you have like, they have a 3/1, which would normally be a good trade into Merciless Hunter. You can just force it to trade with, your House Spider token or something like that. So I think that's really helped the deck out, and the fact that you've got that really good matchup in Azir Irelia means that it's a pretty strong deck at the moment, and most of its creature sizing dodges a lot of the hate which people are running for Irelia Azir. So keep that in mind if you are going to play an aggro deck to try and prey on Irelia or Azir. If you can, try to size your creatures so you don't get wrecked by, the ice shards, the death lotuses, these random cards which are, in general, horrible, but are really efficient answers against Irelia. So, this Azir burn deck has a lot of 2 toughness units, for instance. So it's got Legion Rearguard, it's got Bakai Reaper as some of its 1-drops, and then, you've got your 4/3 Merciless Hunter, and it's running Ruin Runner, which is a 6/4 and just really good at ending games, and, really good at just laughing in the face of that deal 1 to all enemies style removal.
Yeah, absolutely. Ruin Runner is a hell of a card. I'm just looking through some stats at the moment. If you thought that with the new set it was going to be the time to bust out the Buried Sun Disc, it just is not.
Yeah.
To the surprise of probably no one, it's still quite bad. So that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, that one's disappointing. I feel like, Soothsayer is another card that I was pretty high on in spoiler season, and it just has not shown up at all. There hasn't really been a reason to run it, even with backline champs like Azir, just being clear players in the meta. It still just has not been worth running it. I think part of that is because, with Irelia or Azir, for instance, you just spend so much time setting up that you just don't really have time to Soothsayer, and a lot of the time you might even end up with multiple copies of your champions in hand because you do tend to, I guess, mulligan towards them, or if they are sticking in play, you don't need the additional ones. Like you were saying earlier, Maitland, you actively want Irelia to die in some spots so that you can play another from hand, which is a completely planned play. Yeah, that is honestly that is genius. Your subconscious was no, this is a great line. Don't worry, I've calculated this. Yeah,
yeah, and like you were saying,
Soothsayer has sucked.
Yeah, Azir is basically unkillable already. It doesn't really need spell shield. It's just, and that's sort of just a sort of quirk of how Runeterra is currently, is that 3-drop with 5 toughness is until you've
strike
got,
or bust.
Yeah, until you've got big Screeching, even Screeching Dragon can't kill in one hit. Vengeance is so mana inefficient, and like you said, if you're outside of that, you're trying to avalanche, flock, and so it's just, it doesn't really need spell shield when. And maybe it'll be a tech thing that people will sub in at some point if people figure out how to kill Azir. But at the moment, if your opponents can't kill Azir, why would you bother giving it spell shield?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's everything on the ladder at the moment. I've been enjoying the new patch. I just think this Irelia deck is just really sweet to play, and it'll probably get a bit obnoxious, especially if you're running to mirror. The mirrors are pretty fun too, though. They're pretty interesting, but. Yeah, we'll see how the meta evolves over the next week and what ends up, rising to the top over the next week as we continue to try new things.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. What else has been? It's been going on with me at the moment. I'm just packing up all my stuff today. We're moving into our new house in 2 weeks, so that's going to be very exciting. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, very good. That's awesome. Great news.
Yeah,
what's been happening with me?
What has been happening with you?
Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, I mean, I'm doing that. My wife's pregnant, so we're getting ready for that to happen and work, and that's pretty much eating up a lot of my time at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good that you found some time to jam some Runeterra, get your Irelia on. Even though I know you were so excited for Malphite, I'm sorry that he didn't work out. He's not as powerful as you hoped.
I wanted to play Malphite so bad, and it is hard to jam Runeterra at the moment because my laptop's getting fixed, and I playing on your phone's fine, but if I don't like playing on my phone when I'm sitting at home, I'd rather play on a bigger screen, and for some reason my tablet just, even at the lowest quality settings, it still runs Runeterra really poorly, which is odd because it runs other things fine, but it's not a great experience.
Yeah, that's disappointing. Speaking of things that don't run poorly, I picked up a PS5 last week. I'm not sure if I mentioned that on the app last week, but that's been exciting. That's been cool. I've been playing some games, most of which I'd already played on PS4, but still good.
Yep.
I've been playing through Spider-Man, the Miles Morales one. So that's been fun. Had a free PS5 upgrade, so thank you for that.
Spider-Man
and yeah, it's been enjoyable.
Really short. Really surprised me how short it was.
Yeah, it feels like they might have just kind of rushed it out because they were like, oh, we want this for the PS5 release. But yeah, the story definitely did feel pretty short, but it was still a fun game. I enjoyed it. I'd recommend it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was great. It was, I mean, it had the same mechanics as the first one, which is just a classic game, and then it did some cool things as well. Have you looked at Returnal?
Ooh, I was looking at that actually. That looks pretty interesting. One downside to the PS5 is the games are just so expensive. Like the cheapest I could find it was like 110 Aussie bucks,
really?
and I just wasn't sure if that was I just wasn't sure if I could commit to that. Like, am I going to like this game enough? Because I don't know. I don't fully know the genre of the game. I was watching some gameplay. I was like, this looks kind of cool, but am I going to spend like $110 worth of time playing this? I could buy, 4 copies of Slay the Spire for my friends and force them to play, and that would just be, so much extra value. Like, what should I do, Maitland?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big first-person shooter person. First-person shooter roguelike as well has me sort of scratching my head a bit. Yeah, I don't know, but it's. I mean, the thing for me with PS5 at the moment is why do I need one?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's probably worth waiting on the PS5 at this point. But yeah, it has been fun. It's been good to have one. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As always, you can sign up to our Discord, which is a great server. People have been very active there. A lot of good discussion about spoilers and new decks that are going well. You can also feel free to follow us on Twitter. So you can find Maitland at Maitland Cameron, and you can find me at Winterberry. Those will be available in the description, and we'll see you next week.